This panel is titled Innovative Ideas on Transition from Humanitarian to Development Support. And by the way, my name is Naohiko Mata. I'm a Senior Research Officer of the Humanitarian Innovation Project, which is based at the Refugee Studies Center here at Oxford. And before moving on to the presentation, maybe I just want to say a few words about the scope of this plenary session. I think in the morning, the keynote speech delivered by Mr. Raouf Mazou gave us a good context for this panel, I think. I mean, humanitarian sectors are facing a lot of daunting challenges. And it is very clear that we have to change something. We have to do something differently. Right? And it has been well recognized and also widely discussed that many of the humanitarian challenges in the contemporary world can benefit from the better use of ideas, approaches, instruments that are drawn from the development sector. For example, in the morning, probably you heard the word so-called protracted refugee situation. Right? What it means is that refugees are living in exile for at least 5 years. But in fact, the average length of their exile is right now approaching to 2 decades, 17 years. And as of 2014, if I'm not mistaken, 10 million refugees out of 60 million refugees worldwide are living in this kind of situation. So for such a long-term displacement context situations, continuous provision of so-called typical relief aid does not work very well. It can become even harmful. It can undermine autonomy of displaced communities. It might induce some kind of dependency among the recipient communities. Right? So for recent years, there's a growing recognition we need to move away from the traditional humanitarian model to more like a development-oriented approaches that can enhance agency, capacity, creativity of the displaced communities. So the focus of this panel is to discuss and also explore these new or innovative ideas or approaches that might be able to bridge humanitarian and development sectors. Okay. And we are delighted to have 3 speakers who have a very great experience in this area. And we are also really thankful that they come from all over the world, Washington, D.C., Geneva, and Gaza to attend this conference. So thank you very much for your time. And I just want to briefly introduce just their name and also current institutional affiliation first. Neil Salient, he's a manager of the Global Program on Forced Displacement from the World Bank Group. And also Teresa Beltramo, she's a senior economist of UNHCR. And also Elena Cuello, am I pronouncing your name correct? Yeah. And she's a food security livelihood coordinator of the Oxfam Gaza. In terms of the structure of this panel, after this brief introduction, each speaker will give us, let's say, 5 minutes opening remarks. They will explain who they are, what their organization is doing, and after that, we move on to kind of panel discussion. And also, we will secure enough time for Q&A. Okay? So you will also have an opportunity to ask some questions to the speakers today. So on that note, okay, why don't we move on to the opening remarks? And Niels, can I start with you?
Okay. You can start with me.
Yes.
The question is whether I can start when you ask me to start, because you said we come from all over the world, which is true. So this is the double graveyard session with the second session after lunch plus jet lag. So I have no clue what I'm going to tell you, but let's see what happens.
Yes.
I have some scribble notes here, so that may help me or may confuse me as we proceed. But I look at the first page, and that leaves me, or the title of why we are here for this panel, and that leaves me to one remark. And that is innovative ideas on transition from humanitarian to development support. That's a little bit of an old-fashioned sentence, actually, because we have since long come to agreement that it should be an and not a to, which may sound simple, but that has huge implications. When we have crises and stuff like this, development and political actors and humanitarian actors has to be around the table from the beginning. That we have learned since many years. What we maybe are not so good at is to actually do it. But that's another issue. Now then, what should I start with? I think I liked Rao's remarks in the morning, since we are supposed to talk about new things. He refers to the work that we have done from the bank side with UNHCR in the Horn of Africa and Turkana. And this is holding some examples for a possible new way of doing business. But I may come back a little bit to that. Now then, for a few minutes to kick us off, something about scope, something about development implications, something about the problem, something about solutions, and what's new. How do I do this? Scope, people have reminded us all the time about the 60 million, about that's 1% of the world's population, protracted for 17 years. And this is interesting because this is what gets traction in the bank where I work, because people understand that it's a different issue if people live in limbo for 17 years. I just want to add a couple of remarks to the scope, because I think it's much bigger than this, because there are a large number of displaced people that are undocumented. There are also displaced people that have supposedly found solution and have returned home but never really found a solution. Afghanistan and the Balkans and other places. I think there are unfinished reintegration business. And then not least, you have affected host communities, often in poor lagging regions, that are as affected by this in many ways as displaced people. So maybe we are talking about close to 5% of the world's population when it comes to it. So this is just my addition to the scope issues. And if we want to look at trends, unfortunately, the numbers are increasing. And we see very few solutions these days. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, we have some large return movements, but they don't come around that often these days. In terms of development implications, I think it's in order to break out of the usual paradigm, I think it's to understand that displacement is actually more a development issue than it is a humanitarian one, particularly when it talks about protracted displacement and when solutions eventually do come about. And we in the bank side, we talk about four main areas. It's about housing and productive capacity, it's about livelihoods, it's about services or access to services, education, health, etc. And then it's about voice and inclusion and governance at the local level often. So the point is that forced displacement has development implications. And we need from the bank side, why is this important to the bank? It is because we can't achieve our goals of poverty reduction unless we address and include the 1% plus or even up to 5% of people that are excluded from our work if we don't take it into account. So what's the problem? The problem is that there's still a knee-jerk reaction to see it as a short-term humanitarian issue. And even when it becomes protracted, the policies and the actions stay there. And it's also from policymaker point of view not always well understood. So others have also mentioned, and even in the preamble to this, for decades humanitarian actors, and I've done it myself, were promoting care and maintenance models, which leads to dependency and entitlement, and can also lead to exclusion and more poverty, which is bad enough, and in some cases this can lead to radicalization and war. So that model is not necessarily always the best to follow, but as other speakers have talked to before today, there's sort of growing recognition that we should move away from that, and UNHCR is leading this by talking about how to address displacement issues for people that do not live in camps. And I think that's an important trend. Solution, I think the solution lies in a mindset change. And not so much for humanitarian actors. I think it's policymakers and those of us that do development and help governments and policymakers in governments to deal with this issue. That's where the mindset change has to be. It has to. It's clear that the issue is a long-term problem. We don't want it to be a long-term problem, but it is. So we need to change our mindset to think about it in the long term. How to contain and prevent, contain displacement issues and how to prevent it to turn into something that is bad, as I mentioned, all with the aim of solutions one day. So basically you can say that it's a comprehensive issue that looks at humanitarian, political, and developmental and security issues. And the policy change that has to happen, I think, has to do with some sort of temporary economic integration until people can find a solution. And therefore, it is maybe sort of the solution is more political than it is technical. So if this is correct, what I just said, which of course it may not be, but I think it's along the right direction, what new things are then happening? I think we have a couple of examples, as was mentioned in the keynote address this morning, and I can maybe go into that a little bit later. But it has to do with performing some joint analysis led by development actors in close collaboration with humanitarian agencies such as UNHCR. That can lead to a different type of policy dialogue with governments and a different way of dealing with the needs of both affected host populations and displaced, and has the potential of leading to a good regional debate in a different way that has been done in the past. I think I've overshot my 5 minutes, so I better stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Niels. So Teresa, please.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the invite. Let me start, I guess, by first being upfront about at least one limitation that I can identify of my opening remarks. I'm sure you'll identify others, but it's my hair. So I arrived yesterday late in the evening to my gracious accommodations to Somerville College, and I couldn't locate my hair dryer this morning. So thank you for bearing with me and my hair as I go forward. So let me start with a couple key points that I think are are elements of what we need to go forward with this discussion. So we know that the number of forcibly displaced people has more than doubled over the MDG era. We had 20 million in 2000. In 2014, there were 51 million. The 60 million figure mid-year, 2015 figure, it's only growing. Just to kind of give a metric, we know in 2014, some 11 million people were forcibly displaced. That's a rate of 30,000 people a day. So as we look forward, we have to kind of think back what we've achieved in the past. And looking at the SDGs, to achieve the goals by 2030, this will require governments to reduce all people's vulnerabilities. Development and humanitarian actors must commit to jointly manage crises and risks through building resilience, productivity, and inclusion in development of vulnerable, hard to reach, and long-term displaced populations and their host communities. Solutions to forced displacement should start as early as possible. We know that the longer displacement lasts, the harder it is to find solutions. Prevention is better than cure. Building resilience helps to reduce the risk of crises and to shorten recovery time from natural disasters and conflict. It also can offset the associated costs with conflict. The associated growing cost of the associated growing cost of recovery. So getting there, this is going to require a development commitment to close the finance gap for social spending to the poor in some of the least developed, most vulnerable, and conflict-affected situations. So what are we doing at UNHCR to support this joint mandate? And how are we changing at HCR to support these goals? I only have a few minutes, so I'll limit what I will highlight. But for the first thing I want to highlight is we're building our human capacity. We're building our technical capacity in the promotion of self-reliance. Just as a sort of a marker, in 2012, we had some 4 international livelihoods or self-reliance posts at HCR. And in just a short period, in 2014, we grew exponentially to some 16. And this complements our very competent national staff colleagues as well. With that, increased technical capacity, we're also, the livelihoods unit, which is my unit at HCR, we've issued, I think, the first of its kind, a minimum criteria for all global operations at UNHCR and their partners to doing self-reliance programs. And the goal of this minimum criteria is to set up a set of requirements that will help operations to build self-reliance programs that are sustainable, that are data-driven, that are market-based, that are results and impact-oriented. We're changing how we do business with development actors and the private sector. Niels has opened that discussion, but I think from this side, I would say that it's clear that the World Bank has really redefined its approach to refugees and forcibly displaced people, particularly by building this population into the bank's core products. Together with Niels' team and the Global Program on Forced Displacement, we have co-financed and co-produced 3 analytical reports on forced displacement regional situations, one in the Sahel, one in the Great Lakes region, and then our most recent report in the Horn of Africa. I think what's notable about these reports is that these are not just tombs that we put onto a shelf. These have actually been followed by financial commitments, very large financial commitments to operationalize these recommendations and build out programming. The regional facility that followed the Great Lakes region study, it was 100 million, and the Horn of Africa is 150 million. So within that, the government of Zambia and Tanzania have both borrowed money to support the local development programs for former refugees and newly naturalized citizens. And together with the bank, our HCR team and colleagues and partners are sitting at the table to jointly design those programs right now. We're in project preparation phase. And it's a new approach and policy dialogue, I would say, that we're really building together. And it's exciting to see some of those walls between ministries break down. Oftentimes, I think, we at HCR find that we have only access to some ministries, and when we really need access to a much wider set of actors. And I think together with the bank, we are, and other colleagues are building a more sustainable and strategic approach with all actors. And in Uganda, together we are in discussions to look at jointly authoring the Refugee and Host Population Empowerment Strategy. This is led by HCR right now, but we're looking to collaborate with the bank. This strategy is to support resilience building efforts targeting refugee-affected districts by implementing coordinated multi-sector programs. And this is in line with the government of Uganda's National Development Plan as well. And as my colleague Ralph mentioned this morning, in Turkana County, there's a joint study by the operations together to look at the economic impact of refugees on the host economy in Turkana, which is also very exciting. We also have in the pipeline a new regional study looking at the Lake Chad Basin forced displacement issues together. So looking at the insurgency and conflict related from Boko Haram, at the environment, at the self-reliance issues, at security. We're in Syria together. We have adapted the standard poverty assessment tool that the bank uses to include vulnerability as as part of that assessment. So that's also another exciting aspect. And then we are working together in a technical advisory capacity, I think building off of our flagship self-reliance program in Doloado that's been funded by the IKEA Foundation. We're now going on a joint mission at the end of this month together to look at the hard issues about the design of this agricultural program, at its beginning stages with technical experts from the agricultural department at the bank and other colleagues from the regional hub to make sure that we bring in partners at the early stages of the design of this program and build a program that is will be impact oriented, that will deliver on its strategic objectives, that's in line with the government's plan, that we can disengage with. At the end of the day, we have to build a platform forward. So those are some areas that I think I want to highlight, and I think just to say in closure that we have moved forward in several areas, and together, as well as I'll highlight just one more area, which is our work on the Solutions Alliance together. And there's 3 working groups that have emerged from the Solutions Alliance, and one of them that I co-lead with Alex is the Data and Performance Management Working Group. And within that working group, we've prioritized from the research side the importance of assessing the methodologies that academic researchers and practitioners think are the most relevant for understanding the impacts of refugees on host economies. And we're really looking to build that evidence base. It's become a priority within our organization so that we can sit at the table and policy dialogue with some real hard evidence that's independent and look at the general equilibrium effects of refugees. And we know a lot about the costs of refugees, and there certainly are costs. But what about the other side too? What about the impacts, the positive impacts that we've seen in some places? So. And finally on that, we've also just about to finish our evaluation of applicants for our request for proposals. We've launched a request for proposals on the economic impact of refugees on host economies, and we're very excited to engage with academic research institutions on those questions, looking at labor market impacts and or trade impacts, and maybe also looking at aid flows. So with this increase of forced displaced people globally, the financial cost of the humanitarian crisis has also risen. I mean, estimates have said, over that MDG period, we had a $5 billion cost in 2000, rose to $18 billion in 2014, and continuing to rise. But yet, the financing for this increased demand is just not there. So, HCR really has no choice but to promote the increase of self-reliance of refugees through strategic results-based partnerships with development partners like those I've just described with the World Bank, and with private sector actors like we've modeled in our partnership with IKEA. So thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. So, Elena, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks also for allowing me to participate with you and Teresa also. We have heard a lot of the figures from the World Bank about Africa at least. And it is important to remember that for INGO, the basis of our figures most of the time are the World Bank reports. Now, the area where I work right now is Gaza, but the work I do with Oxfam is, for the past 2 years, is a questioning of what is it that we as INGOs are doing wrong. I mean, Oxfam was created in 1948, and we have had very few successes at the level of removing poverty. And Oxfam, like the World Bank, is interested in eradicating poverty. So there is a process of questioning, of evaluation, what is it that we are doing wrong? and we have identified a number of interesting points. How is it that we have silos for our humanitarian and our development? So there is no possibility of a linking of divide there, although the divide in itself in the field is a construct. Then we are compartmentalizing also the needs. Beneficiaries have needs and they go in other silos. So we have reduced our level of accountability with beneficiaries and have increased it with donors because our funding that was an institutional funding is also dwindling. So there is a very big process of questioning right now that is directing a lot of the new thinking of partnership, partnering with the private sector, partnering with universities, that we are doing in an area right now that is a hot spot, and it's the Gaza Strip, that does not serve very much as a model for the way you do things in other places, but that has allowed us to take opportunities in a very reduced pile of opportunities. And we have gotten now some attention from the World Bank and the UNHCR, because the last war of 2014, we had an enormous amount of displaced. So the presence of displaced has brought a lot of international attention. And then we have gotten a new report from the World Bank that is very informative, with the problem that in Gaza, the gross national product really as a measure does not mean anything. So we are also exploring the partnership with local partners and with governments, with an extra problem that in Gaza we have a terrorist government, so we're not allowed to engage with them directly. So we've had to really partner with UN organizations to try to develop surrogate partnerships that allow for scale up in emergencies. I would like, during the conversation, to explain more about what is it that we are innovating in the case of Gaza. And thank you, and we can open now.
Thank you very much. I mean, it was very informative opening remarks. And I think there are a couple of themes that, some of you already mentioned. And I just want to a little bit, build upon some of the common themes as a kind of entry point for the discussion. And Nils, you mentioned about the title of the presentation. This is, I agree, it's old-fashioned. It's not like an either-or question or like a two-where. No, it should be and, because it's often coexisting. And also, as you highlighted, we are not the first group of the people to discuss this theme. Development, also humanitarian nexus. And the international community had tried this issue previously, but in my understanding, previous attempts did not necessarily make good success. And I'm just curious to know that what was wrong in the previous approach? Elena, you already touched upon some of the things, but if you could elaborate those kind of things, and also Nils, you have a massive experience in this area. So I'm going to be delighted to hear your quite honest opinions. And maybe, Elena, you can just a little bit build upon.
Just very generally, we have a way of feeling we have a source of power because we have aid. Then we arrive to places and we have a pool of beneficiaries. That's our first problem up to now, because when we start changing in pilots, we see the difference. So we take away the agency from people. And the moment you take away the agency, you take away the responsibility. If you do not make somebody responsible for something, you are taking away from them the tools for autonomy. That's, for me, the biggest overarching point. Then we have also the problem with governments in the Middle East. We spoke about Africa. But in the Middle East, we have the Jordanian governments, we have Lebanon, Syria, we have all this. And in Gaza, we have a configuration of a government that right now we're not supposed to work with, and that we have to work with because we are working with a social safety net. So it is a backdoor work that we cannot even report. Try to engage in capacity building, enhancing what is possible, and this is what makes us more resourceful in finding opportunities that usually come by accident from the field and from these same participants, end users that we call beneficiaries, and that are the ones that trigger the big change at the institutional level. Niels?
Why didn't it work in the past? Where should I start? This is in a way the story of my life. I think there's a time for everything. And those of us that were involved in the CARA 1 and 2 in the 80s and refugee aid and development in the early 90s, and more recently that some of you may be able to remember the so-called Brookings process. That was UNHCR and Wolfenson, Ogata and Wolfenson that talked about this. Ralph and myself were involved in that. And with Lubos in his after that, we also had activities. I think it was important because the problem is as we are seeing it today, was also the problem then. That hasn't changed, but maybe the world has changed slightly. I think why these things maybe did not come to fruition were that maybe they were a little bit ahead of their time, or one thing that I felt was that it was the Brookings process in particular was very much promoted by humanitarian agencies rather than being genuinely led, co-led with development agencies, and that didn't really work too well. And then it was also quite top-down. So that is sort of, I think, why all these lessons that we learned from this, I think, has gone into two things that we are talking about today. And that is, one, the design of the Solutions Alliance, which now includes 4 entities as co-chairs on how to run with the agenda. That includes affected governments, bilaterals, UN and NGOs. That's one work stream that I think has a better chance of delivering results than maybe the past initiatives had. And then there's the work that we've been I talked about, and Teresa also mentioned, and Ralph this morning, what the bank is leading together with UNHCR and partners. I think that also learns from the past experiences and maybe have a better chance of giving results.
Do you want to add something?
Just a minor, a couple other additions. I think I would say that one thing that we haven't necessarily always done very well is bring in partners at the very beginning. I think sometimes we have brought in partners late, and that's not, the best time is when we're in the design phase of our programs. And I think a leading example is we're looking in Kenya at the new site together with development partners already at the very beginning of, of site planning for the new camp. And so these are exciting examples. And I would say that I have seen, I would again highlight that we are growing our technical capacity on self-reliance. I mean, I think that's key for us as an organization at HCR to be able to engage thoughtfully on the design of self-reliance programs. So I would say that also. And then, we're also, I would say, maybe catching up with development, applying some development methodologies on, program design related to self-reliance, like using the asset-based community development approach for the design of livelihoods or self-reliance programs. And that has been very successful so far in some settings. So,
and if I can add on this also, Oxfam is increasing the involvement of partners at the design level because they are the ones who have the grassroots context. So they are the ones that really can provide the perceived need. We had a session before, Pascal, you were in there, ICRC, discussing precisely that when we do needs assessment with previous ideas about needs, and it's not stemming from the community, we are missing the element of the perceived need, which is the real need for the person that has been affected.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I think on the needs stuff, I've been making some scribbles here. Also thinking about what Jelte was talking about at the other panel on what could be done or what would be the best use of the World Humanitarian Summit. And I think a lot of it, in my view, has to do with how we precisely define needs. And I think we have to look at the needs of both the displaced, their host communities, and for those that go home, also not only the returnees, but hosting communities, because sometimes those communities, although their situation is different, are as poor or as, maybe not as vulnerable, but sometimes as poor. And I'm estimating that the total needs are way beyond what we can support from the totality of humanitarian budgets and even the totality of government development budgets and ODA and so on. So the focus must have to be to how do we reduce the needs then? And that would be, if we want to do new things, I think that's what we should think about. I mean, of course, one way of reducing the needs is to deal with the root causes, but that's one box that requires a whole different conference. But if you want to reduce needs for assistance, then you have to have some policy space for people, allowing people to look after themselves, rather than having to be supported either by humanitarian support or by development types of poverty reduction direct support. And also then developing better targeting mechanisms for finding those people in communities, because most people now, displaced people, do not live in camps but in communities, and that makes the whole system much more difficult in terms of providing the correct assistance. But in the bank we have some good experiences with methodologies for how to actually target the most vulnerable. We are testing that, or not testing, we are using that in Lebanon, for example. And then we also have to look at additional different ways of financing those governments that are affected by this. And I think for that reduction of needs package to happen, that will require some sort of policy considerations or changes from governments. And these are not easy decisions to take. And there we need to help the affected governments as much as we can with assessment and analysis that gives policy options to governments, and also documenting as many of the examples that we have in terms of operations that are mitigating the impact.
Because all of you mentioned about this importance of partnership, especially like a buy-in from the local government, because in terms of providing development support, especially for refugees, often local host communities or host government become the kind of often bottleneck, And there are a couple of examples, like you mentioned about Zambia, Uganda. There are some changes seemingly appearing right now, and do you think that why are these governments a little bit more being generous or like a little bit softening? What is your kind of view? What's going on there? Who wants to start?
Well, I'm not sure whether there's a recent softening per se. I was recently in Uganda, where I also worked several decades ago. And I think Uganda has had a quite a progressive way of looking at displacement since the early 60s. And they don't have camps, they have settlements, and they are very clear on making the difference, because the difference is clear for those of us that know it. Camps are camps. I've done that myself with Indo-Chinese and so on, where you have camps with barbed wire around, and that's that. the settlements in Uganda are not camps. They are that. They are large chunks of gazetted government land where people can live together with the nationals that live there. So I mean, that is a sort of a different way of doing it. In fact, we are right now working with the government of actually reviewing the evolution of the Ugandan policy to find out how it evolved to what it is today and what impact that has had. So I'm not going to prejudge what we get out of the study, but it will be quite interesting to see.
Interesting, yeah.
I mean, maybe just to pick up, I would look to even colleagues who've been in the field much longer than me and who may have answers to that. But just to pick up on the Uganda example, at our recent XCOM, a high-level official in the refugee agency was citing that, Uganda has had its own experiences of being refugees, and that they, this is part of their policy that they've, that has influenced their own approach to hosting refugees, as their own memory of being refugees, and then the important role that refugees play in nations rebuilding. So I would cite that might be one, but I would look to other colleagues who have more experience in this.
This reminds me of one thing. I mean, the president himself has often, or from time to time, referred to the fact that many or some of the neighbors of Uganda, senior officials now have been, in their earlier days, been refugees in Uganda, and they are now capable high-level members of their own societies precisely because they were benefiting from full-fledged education and other services while they were refugees in Uganda. So this is an example where maybe you treat refugees well and they then become good neighbors afterwards.
Do you want to add something? Well,
we don't have in the Middle East in this moment experiences that are very promising. We have the case of Jordan with the Syrian refugees and the problems that one has working with them, because it may be that the funds that the Jordanian government has for their poverty reduction is quite small. And then in order to work with the Syrian refugees, we have to agree to work first with the local community and afterwards work with a percentage of the Syrian refugees around. So when governments do not have social safety systems and social protection systems that are really in place, this will be the first thing that falters when refugee comes.
Thank you. I'm kind of slightly changing the topic right now on the same issue that so far we haven't had that much about the role of displaced community themselves, but from keynote speech by Raouf and also from other types of research, we know that refugees or other types of forced migrants, they're also making ways through even in the lack of effective development support. I'm wondering that in your work, in your organization, are there any kind of initiative to capture those kind of bottom-up innovation or like those kind of initiatives? Maybe Elena, you can speak about.
Well, it's quite recent. It's related to the innovation that we are doing with the e-voucher, which is a bond to provide humanitarian aid with dignity. And WFP was giving, as usually, general food distribution. And they began with a pilot with Oxfam in Gaza with bonds, a limited pilot, to try to bring products that were dairy and eggs. And all these things were coming from, just a brief, I don't know if you are aware of the situation of Gaza right now, because then I may give just a few lines.
Please do. Yeah.
Gaza has, from 1948, became under the tutel of Egypt. And afterwards, in 1967, then the Israeli occupation united the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So basically, they have always been occupied. When the Israelis came in 1967, then there was a push to move all the people from the West Bank and Gaza as workers in Israel for the construction of the Israeli state, which was a very successful situation at the time. Now, in the late 80s, almost at the beginning of the 90s, their policy changed, and with the arrival of the Palestinian Authority, then they changed. They had a complete turn, and Gaza was closed. So from an open doors policy that took all the people out of their land and gave them cash, immediate cash, all of a sudden the permits dwindled. They were not allowed to go out in Israel anymore. And now for the past 15 years, there is total closure. So in the context of a protracted crisis, and there is very little inklings that the situation can change if there is not a political solution, then it's like how to make better use of the humanitarian aid and give them sustainable options so they do not depend 100% from the aid. Gaza has problems right now of obesity, diabetes, heart attacks, because it's humanitarian aid that is very starchy, so people have problems. So we are giving a lot of support also in nutrition to WFP to teach people how not to fry things, how to try to really buy produce and use the little amount of money that they have for this. So it is a totally different situation, and the fact that aid is there to stay then made us think, what can we do in order to change the situation slightly? And since we cannot work with the government, WFP appeared a very improbable but willing partner, and we began with them this pilot. What is fascinating about it is that at the beginning of the pilot in 2009, we were receiving all the things through Israeli markets. And at this point now, around 60%, 78% of the produce is produced by the small-scale producers in the Gaza Strip. So there has been an amazing shift from WFP bringing food from outside into producing food and using it in these bonds.
Are they refugees?
The situation of Gaza is two-thirds refugees,
right? Yeah.
and one-third locals. But since the refugee situation has been there since 1948, and then in 67 we got a new wave of refugees, then it's very hard to maintain the interest of refugee organizations because it becomes a status quo. So only when there is a periodic war, Gaza gets some attention. So it's really very sad to say this. So going back to the innovation, we began trying to locate opportunities. The small producers began selling their products through the voucher, and organically there was a development of synergies that now is becoming institutionalized through WFP. So now we are really forcing a little bit certain value chains to allow people to get a market channel that is safe until there is a solution, and then the market can work on itself.
You wanted to say
Sure.
something?
I would say we have, I could highlight three examples. One would be, we, in this new climate where we don't, WFP cannot support the food aid that is needed, the demand. We've been forced to think about innovative practices, and together in Chad and across the whole nation, we've started a wealth-based targeting. This is our first ever wealth-based targeting. We co-wrote the targeting strategy with WFP, and it's a participatory based approach where we start with the communities that actually, each community identifies the set of assets that the four groupings belong in, and then we go out and do a series of surveys. I won't tell you the whole process, but this process is participatory. It has an appeals mechanism. We're very closely following this because I think we know that we have to get ready for continued cuts in situations like this. And I mean, I would say that. The couple camps we've done, so they have camps in Chad, the couple camps we've done so far, I mean, there have been it's been very successful. So it's encouraging, and we're learning from issues we've had with the appeals process, or how to improve the groupings, et cetera, and how to improve the process, for going forward. Of course, another, bottoms-up approach I've already hinted at is the work we've been able to do in Dolo thanks to the IKEA Foundation and their sustained commitment, which is, again, a rare thing in this budget environment. So we've been able to, we're in the second phase of our programming, which is they're supporting 3 sectors, but self-reliance is one of them. And, we are looking at, designing that program together with taking, a bottoms-up approach and consultative community, both host and refugee community, in designing the livelihoods programs there, and including a monitoring system which involves refugee ambassadors in the community, that they're trained, not only to help us monitor the impacts of these programs, but also to be the focal point with the community to assess the community demand for new self-reliance programs, and how to adapt the program to be more in line with their needs. And I would say that this has been really valuable, just in terms of of helping the team there to navigate maybe sometimes what can be donor-driven programs, where a donor may come in and say, "Oh, listen, I've got all this agricultural, I could give you these seeds or something," and having the community be so engaged and be able to say, "You know what, we don't want seeds. That's not what we need. We need water and sanitation, or et cetera." So I think it's really helped us to not waste scarce resources, I would say. And then I would also mention maybe just one more, which is our an innovative approach, which involves crowdsourced financing for microfinance loans, and this is in Kenya with urban refugees and Kiva Zip, where it's a small program but pilot, and it targets vulnerable, the most vulnerable actually. It's an interesting approach, but it's allowed these urban refugees in Kenya to access microfinance when there really is no other way that they could, given the requirements of getting a bank account, et cetera. So these are a couple areas I would highlight.
Interesting.
I know I have something to say. I forgot what the question was because it's more than 10 seconds ago. But I think it had something to do with communities and stuff like this.
Yeah, like a bottom-up.
And the bottom-up, there you have it. I think the program I lead in the bank for the last few years, I took a very strong outward look towards partnership right from the beginning, particularly with NGOs, of course with UNHCR and others, but NGOs in particular, because they are very close to communities, right. And small is small, we heard this morning, but it can sometimes be taken to scale, and this is something that we sometimes can do in the bank, and I think we have listened carefully to a number of NGOs on what they have done, and UNHCR too, but also some NGOs on livelihood issues, for instance, and these things will influence the programs that are presently being designed that Teresa mentioned in the Great Lakes and in the Horn that government wants the bank to assist with. Secondly, I think that it also has to do with how to look at refugees not only as a burden but also as an asset. I think that goes together with community engagement and bottom-up thinking. And there I would like to mention again to those that slept in class early in the morning on the Turkana initiative that Ralph mentioned, because I think that has the elements of, if it turns out to materialize in its full vision, how we should deal with this. This is where the local government has suggested that we should help the government, and the bank and UNHCR should help the government with an approach that benefits both the new South Sudanese refugees as well as the locals, to improve socioeconomic conditions of the nationals, and also aiming at as many as possible of the South Sudanese to be self-reliant until they can go home one day and not lose their coping strategies, as was also mentioned in another panel this morning. So this is about creating a regional development plan that serves as a win-win for both nationals as well as refugees. And I think, and then one of the implications of that is, of course, that UNHCR does not have to feed 100,000 South Sudanese. And therefore UNHCR's care and maintenance type investment does not have to happen, because the refugees are looking after themselves. This is a practical example of what I talked about in more general terms when I spoke first. So this is early days, and the economic impact assessment, or the assessment that the bank is doing together with the government and UNHCR here, is not done yet. So this is early days, but this has all the right pointers in the right direction to be the right thing to do.
Thank you, Nils. And it's very interesting, and I'm really enjoying and hearing from three of you. And but at this moment, it's coming to 5 o'clock, so I also want to open up the floor to the guests. And okay, I'm already.
They're alive. There are arms out there. They're not sleeping. They're not sleeping.
Amazing, yeah. So maybe we could just start. Sorry, I'm just a little bit trying to. So could we start with maybe Robert and?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Robert, and Robert Akiza. I stay in Uganda. I'm the director and co-founder for the Young African Refugees for Integral Development. And I would like to thank you so much for that's very good presentation. And I think we are really learning a lot from it. So I would like a little bit to comment and also to ask a few questions. Yes, it's good looking at the current situation of refugees. I mean the protected situation for refugees today. We need really to move from dependency to a sustainable approach, which is good. Because when you look at, especially where, like in Uganda, where I'm from, where refugees are given the right to work and to do the freedom of movement, this is something that is really very important for them to become self-sustainable. With my experience, what I've realized for the couple of years I've been working as a refugee myself and working with refugees, I've realized that it is really the system in place that pushes refugees to become dependent. Because of my experience, I've seen many refugees who really want to stand on their feet and do something, but they lack support. At the side of UNHCR, this is not the first time. I'm happy to hear that you're trying to get a new way, but I'm a little bit worried because we've had a lot of policies, livelihood policies, education strategies, global, national. We had, and today we have REHOP. So I'm a little bit worried. How are we going to make sure that these policies are put in practice, looking at what you had before, and when you look at the way they are implemented, it's really negative. Also, I would like to say something about the refugee communities. Of course, we've seen too many researchers and people today, it's not something new, that think that it is one of the solutions to help the refugees in this situation is to help refugees to help themselves. We have so many initiatives on the ground, refugees who have tried to organize themselves in communities. And in Uganda, of course, refugees are given even the right to register their organization as NGOs. But I'm not sure that refugees are really enjoying that opportunity because UNHCR and many other organizations are not considering the refugees. They cannot fund those initiatives, saying that they don't have capacities. Then I wonder, isn't it one of the responsibilities of UNHCR to raise the capacities of the refugees so that they can be at the level of doing what they're supposed to do correctly? I would like to, like in Uganda today, we have, for the last 20 years of my experience, UNHCR had only one implementing partner in Kampala for 20 years. If we can compare the situation in Kenya, it's different. We have in Kenya, UNHCR has many partners in Nairobi, but in Uganda it's different. Recently, I'm happy because UNHCR has made, for the first time since I'm in Uganda, and even the people who've been there before me know this, for the first time UNHCR has made it public. They are looking for partners to work with. And when you look at the criteria, they are rejecting completely the refugees because when you look at the criteria, they target only big organizations. So my question is, how are you giving the chance to this organization working the refugee in the community also to develop and to support better their fellow refugees? Thanks so much.
I wonder that, yes, I did recognize it. Are there any other questions? Okay, there are quite a lot. So let's take maybe let's take 3 questions, 3 people. And yes, please start.
Hi, I'm Emily Arnold Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director of Asylum Access. Niels, I was really glad to hear you mention the policy, the lack of policies that permit refugees to take advantage of development solutions. And I'd like to ask all of you to comment on why that's such a small part of what we're talking about, why that's such a small part of where resources go when, you know, Teresa, for example, you mentioned building resilience with refugees. I have never met a population that's more resilient than refugees, and yet if market access is prohibited, then all the resilience in the world doesn't really go very far. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on shifting that balance, on investing more resources in that policy change, and also on investing those resources in the people who have power to make policy change, which is probably not going to be, you know, a UNHCR country rep who's not a national and comes in for 3 years and then leaves again, is probably going to be local advocacy organizations that have the depth of experience and the political connections to make that change. So how do we achieve that shift? And I apologize, I'm a little bit previewing my remarks tomorrow afternoon. So if you want to talk further about this, we can do it there. But I'd love to hear your comments on that as well.
Maybe let's take one more, actually. Okay, let's go to the closest one. Yeah.
Thank you. Gleda Lan from Chatham House. We're working with partners, including the UNHCR and DFID, on the Moving Energy Initiative, which looks towards developing much more sustainable energy solutions, which would also lead to greater self-reliance of refugees and displaced people. And I've heard mentioned a few times, and I brought it up in my own session, this problem with the planning and budget timeline being so short for the UNHCR and several others, and being very politically or media-driven. So I'd like to ask Teresa and Niels what they think that the actual donor countries could do differently to try to provide that longer-term planning timeframe of maybe 3 or 5 years that you really need to plan a strategy to enable self-reliance to emerge over time.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take another round, but let's start with it because there are already quite a lot of questions. And maybe, Teresa, do you want to start? Because multiple questions are directed to you.
Maybe I'll try to go in order. So thanks, Robert, for your thoughts and comments. You know, how do we ensure success for the new livelihoods programs, and how do we engage with new partners in Uganda? So I think, you know, as was highlighted in the panel from the private sector, I mean, we expect failures. So, you know, we're going to expect things to continue to learn, and we expect in that way we'll have success. So I can't say it's going to be a straight line necessarily. Not all of our livelihoods and, you know, self-reliance initiatives in Uganda will be, you know, successful right off the bat. But I think, you know, we are learning and have been, you know, learning from the past initiatives related to self-reliance. And Uganda is in the joint program. We have a joint program with the World Food Program. And Uganda is a pilot where we're looking at building self-reliance because the food distribution has, they're on this time-targeted basis for food assistance. So there's this essential component of self-reliance. So I hope that with the attention and that will improve our ability to learn from the past and really move forward the livelihoods work there. I think, also we have new opportunities for engaging new partners, as we've mentioned, and having colleagues, in the development community, like the bank, help us engage in Uganda with, in a new way, understanding how to build out the value chain for both host and refugee communities is I think, critical for success in some of our existing programs. So those are things we're looking at. In terms of how do we engage new partners, as when the livelihood strategy, which is operations is part of our minimum criteria for livelihoods, are now being required to produce. There is a strategic partner mapping that happens, and the idea is to look across all potential partners and really assess where the strengths are and weaknesses. So I think that's built into the strategic planning process, and partners are evaluated every year and thought about. So I hope that's an answer to that. Maybe I will just touch on, maybe I'll leave Emily's hard question for Niels to answer first, and then maybe come back to it. But on Glada's question, around the disconnect from the humanitarians, HCR's budget cycle of 1 year, and really the longer term planning needs. I am very pleased to say that a new initiative that came out of the solutions, our solutions work with the Alliance and something called the Solutions Steering Group in-house at UNHCR, is the introduction of 3 multi-year pilot countries. So we're going to have 3 countries this year have 3-year budget cycles. So that's the first time we're doing that, and I think the whole vision of that is to then have development partners meet us there with their planning in a longer term fashion, and this is this approach is something I hope we're trialing, we're going to learn. Let's see how we can continue to move forward in that way.
Yes, please.
I think there are 2 points that sort of are a little bit overlapping, and that's with the system pushes, like Robert mentioned, refugees to be dependent, and why there are not so many government policies that allow refugees to work as a matter of policy. I think these 2 things are sort of part and parcel of the same thing. This has a little bit to do with, I think, how the whole issue of displacement has been dealt with since the Second World War, basically. So it's a combination of government way of dealing with this, and how it has become then a business line for humanitarian actors that has sort of been allowed to develop on its own. And this is what I think we are now trying to untangle in order to come to new approaches. We have to. What we are trying to untangle is that displacement is only a humanitarian issue, because this has been the approach for decades, and this is not an easy process. And we change it by doing some of the things that we have talked about as good new examples, but it's a slow process. It's a combination of producing analytical work to present to governments for them to change for policy options, to document operational experience that proves the point, and yeah. On the last point, donors' long-term planning, I think again, the donors, it's not so much what the donors can or should do, because the solution is for governments to realize that they need to include these issues in their national development plans. And that set the stage for donors to support long-term planning. Donors cannot support long-term planning out of the blue. So this is really the way to go here. It's again back to creating and utilizing political space with governments for things to happen differently.
Do you want to add something? Or?
Yeah, just in relation to the donors, we have the same problem with thinking long term and the short term of donor funding, usually 6 months or a year. What we have done at the level of planning with our local partners is to develop a 5-year continuum, and the partial funding that we get creates building blocks that will move on, and this is the way that we are palliating or helping to palliate. Of course, there is a lot of justification to do at the level of our region and donors, because they do not understand how we are doing ambitious behavior change pilots that are only a year. And they have to be explained that they are part of another funding that's a bit longer, that's a year, it's 18 months, and that is going to hook up with that, and afterwards there will be the echo that will continue. It is quite labor intensive to develop these plans, but I think it's a support to what we can do within our limited resources.
Thank you. Okay, and let's take another round of questions. Yes, and so there are quite a lot. Yes, I think maybe over there first, and also 2 back low, and also over there as well. Let's take all of them right now, okay? Because are you answering that? Sorry, I will delineate that one too. Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah. I have a question for Neil. When you say that the agenda from humanitarian actors and development actors should merge when it comes to dealing with refugees or IDPs, I mean there is some sort of consensus among specialists and experts about the fact that we are living in a world of protracted crisis, that people will stay for almost forever, and we have to take stock of it in terms of actions and maybe having some sort of contiguum between emergency action and development, and we cannot just separate the two types of interventions. But when you talk to donors and host states, the tune is totally different, and sometimes I have the impression that we are, developing the flat Earth theory. That everybody agrees that now we have to find new ways of addressing the needs, be smarter. But when we talk to donors and host states, they want to separate clearly, development issues from emergency problems. And how do you deal with that from the World Bank perspective?
Okay.
Can I take that before I forget?
Okay.
Yeah,
So
let's because
yes, please.
so I think this is a good question. I'm not sure I said the agendas between development and humanitarian should merge. I think what's important in my own experience with this is that we should learn to work closely together, but the most important thing is that those of us that do development actually understand that it's a core business for us in our development work. And that is what has not so much been the case, as I mentioned, since it all began in earnest after the Second World War. And that's part of the problem why there is a phobia, as you mentioned, amongst some people that you talk to, that still sees it in their short-term interest to separate the issues. And sometimes maybe that's the right way to do. This is not black and white. This is difficult business we are talking about. But I still would say that we are moving in the right direction. For instance, the discussions we have recently had together with UNHCR, with the government of Ethiopia, for instance, for 40 years there were no such discussion, but when the bank came with a regional initiative to look at interconnectivity and trade and displacement in the Horn, then the Ethiopian government say, hey, wait a minute, this is something new. We've had refugees for a long time. Let's talk, because maybe there's a different way of doing this. So it's about utilizing political space, but it's also about creating a political space by being a little bit innovative and fresh in your approaches. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, let's take, yes, question please.
This is Shadrach from UNICEF in Lusaka, but I've had the experience of working in Ethiopia and also in South Sudan and in Sudan. Maybe just to echo what you have said, the whole issue of trying to create that political space and connecting the development and humanitarian. Because I think there are hopes and fears. The hopes are that if this works, we'll come up with a sustainable solution. But the fear when you talk to some government partners is that, is this a way of the international community dumping them with the baby and leaving them in the lurch once they accept that responsibility? And just because they're in a bad neighborhood with a lot of refugees coming into their country, will they be now left to the responsibility? And this maybe connects with the discussions we had in the morning of how do we finance this new model that we are talking about? How do we support governments who have got a lot of host communities who are very poor, themselves extremely vulnerable, and then why, to put it more bluntly, should they take the load of the world and be responsible for refugees because they happen to cross over their border? And this discussion, we are seeing it right now, even in Europe, when Italy is saying, why should we be the one to carry the brunt just because we are the ones who are in the shores of Mediterranean? Why can't other countries also take part of the responsibility? And I think we should turn this conversation into even other neighborhoods in parts of Africa and maybe in the Middle East, who really have to take care of the humanitarian caseloads, at times sacrificing a lot of the resources that would go to the host community. Because we look at the budgets that UNHCR is managing or NGOs are managing, but most often than not, the budget that host countries have to sacrifice to take care of this responsibility are much bigger than we manage in the humanitarian community. So when you talk of innovation, I really would maybe put my vote on this issue of a global levy so that at least we get sustainable funding so that host governments can be able to look at long-term programming and infuse them into their national development plans so that we can have sustainable solution to the refugee situation. So I really would like to maybe ask the panel, is there appetite for this? Because otherwise what governments would see is that because the caseload has grown so much that the humanitarian community cannot manage as they were managing before, they're looking for solutions to dump the issue and then move away.
And
Can I take that one also before
actually, we have only 5 minutes, so let's go all the way around, and also ready.
Then I will forget.
Yeah. So I appreciate it if you can make a question reasonably concise, actually.
I'll be very fast, no problem with that. Just one thing that really bothers me. I mean, we are talking now about long-term, strong development-related problems, trying to solve that from the humanitarian world. Why are we doing this? I mean, we are forcing UNHCR to sit with refugees and keep them busy for 17, 20, 30, 40 years and talk about resilience and, income generation and all these things that is not within their realm of specialities. They're trying to develop that. But there are other organizations who could have done that from the start. Now, what I was just wondering, maybe, what do you think about a suggestion, just a question to the panel, what do you think about the suggestion that, for instance, next year during the World Humanitarian Summit, instead of saying what we are going to do as humanitarians in order to increase attention for livelihoods, we say we are going to stop all of our activities after 1 or 2 years so that others are forced to take it over. Because those ones, the organizations like UNDP and all the multi-purpose aid organizations are much better in livelihood strategies, building, communication, talking to governments, political maneuvering, dialogue, than the humanitarians are, and they shouldn't be. I mean, we can't do it anyway. There's an enormous lack of money in the humanitarian sector, so why are we going that direction?
Thank you.
Sorry. No, I want to take this one because this is crux of the matter. This is very important. I think, and it's also a very difficult issue. I think it has to do with a couple of things up front. First of all, business as usual doesn't work very well, with a few good exceptions that we have talked about. So change has to happen. And we also know that whether we like it or not, almost all displacement situations become seriously protracted. These are facts. And if we don't take them into account when we think about the policies and what we want to do, we are setting ourselves up for possible failure. And I'm talking about everybody. So these are important things to put on the table first. So therefore, I think also when we should look at if the policy therefore could be elements of the policy framework I mentioned earlier would be improved ability of displaced people to look after themselves. Then we are talking about some way of setting up government policy frameworks that would allow some sort of temporary self-reliance or temporary economic integration. It's clear that it's temporary even if it is long-term, because the ultimate solution must be return. But we know from experience that this takes often many years. There's no quick fix to these things. And this we should also realize. And this is very important. The other point, Hjelte, you mentioned about, we should say at the Humanitarian Summit, stop after a certain time. This, I mean, stop humanitarian aid after a short period of intervention, I understood. I have thought a lot about that too, because there's so much entrenched way of thinking about this that one has to be a little bit tough with projections in order to get to change. And I have thought along the same lines too. This is my personal opinion. And that maybe the approach of humanitarian assistance, life-saving, when it's necessary, from the beginning, should have a very short-term view, forcing everybody that's involved to think long-term from the beginning, knowing that this is a short-term thing. There will not be humanitarian life-saving assistance here for 2, 3, 4 years. It's a short period only, because of a number of circumstances, because of the scope of the number of people globally, because of the limited resources or whatever. This is it. So therefore we have to sit together to develop comprehensive solutions. And that brings me back to the other question about hopes and fears and dumping. These are realistic concerns on the part of governments that are hosting large number of refugees. And that's why you need to have a comprehensive discussion amongst all actors that have an interest and are good partners of any given government. As I mentioned earlier, we have to have a comprehensive discussion on how to deal with this, including looking at concessional financing mission, aspects and some level of additionality as part of a comprehensive solution. And that's important. Because back to what I said early on, business as usual up until now has not worked. And if we change, something has to give. And this is what we need to be aware of, all of us, when we prepare ourselves to assist governments that are impacted by large numbers of refugees, basically taking on the burden for the rest of the world in some of these, both in the Middle East and Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Before that, I mean, I have to take.
Can I just say one thing? And I'll just be very brief. But you know, thanks for this very complex question, I would say, and thoughts around this issue. I would come back and push back a little to say that, one, first of all, I think having other actors that are competent in self-reliance are welcome to the table and should be engaging. And UNDP can be a great actor in some settings, and I would push back and say that hasn't always worked so well. also, and that we haven't found in many places around the globe at HCR that there are partners who are willing to come and be there and do the self-reliance activities with our population. So I would push back a little and say that that's something to consider. And the other piece is that we are receiving more and more from operations that they demand for self-reliance activities at the very beginning of the emergency, and the very limited research we have on the economic impact of being a refugee, on refugee populations for long-term welfare and asset generation. One study finds that that gap that where people have that break in employment, can be part of this dependency generation cycle, and it can be really detrimental for people's overall long-term asset building and long-term welfare. So there's a real risk of not putting in self-reliance programs, I think, when we think about our mandate and the rights of refugees and their ability to enjoy the same rights as all others.
Thank you, and okay, it's coming to 5:30, so let's take one last question, because I think she has been patiently waiting, so thank you for your patience.
Thanks very much. It's linked actually to earlier questions, and it's really just around the importance of addressing social cohesion in our self-reliance and sustainable solutions programs, and how we can work more with local actors, so communities, but then also local private sector, so local businesses, and how integrated they are into our programming.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Yes. No, I think, what do I think? I'm not exactly clear myself what social cohesion means, but it sounds good. Like resilience, it also sounds good. What needs to be in the policies is a recognition that while we are waiting for a solution to be found for displaced people, and that they should not live in camps but in communities, it's important to have interaction and cohesion, albeit temporary, between refugees and host communities. I'll stop there. And we are doing what we can to include that in the operations we are designing.
Areas, we know over 50% of refugees are in urban areas where the social cohesion is absolutely crucial. So just, I work with World Vision, and it's one thing that we're particularly interested in the Middle East, how we can actually improve our social cohesion programming and make sure that we're doing much more integrated work. So just from UNHCR in particular, how can support that.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, it's coming, it's already 5:35, and there's right after this one, there's another session here. So we need to close right now. But first of all, thank you very much for your very active participation. And also, please join me to thank the speakers today. Thank you very much.